The harsh truth is a Republican wouldn't have missed. I don't know what happened. We sent our best barista. We got our meanest vegan, gave him a gun, sent him up there. The bullets were almonds, but it was tough. God, my grandpa would be so fired up right now. He would be like, back in my day, our assassins used to kill the president.
Good morning. It's Monday, Talk Radio Monday, July the 15th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Talk Radio's America. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Lift up your hands, ye heroes, and swear with proud disdain. The wretch that would ensnare you shall lay his snares in vain. Should Europe empty all her force, we'll meet her in array, and fight and shout and shout and fight for North America. Torn from a world of tyrants beneath this western sky, we formed a new dominion, a land of liberty. The world shall own we're masters here, then hasten on the day. Huzzah, 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 for free America.
Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney with the headlines.
All right, we will be covering it all. We will be live from the RNC again here tomorrow, beginning at 6 a.m. Eastern. Please join us. In the meantime, stay with Fox Business. Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. Everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news of the assassination attempt. I was on my own watching Trump's speech on TV. I saw him flinch, hold his right ear, and then the Secret Service agents piled on. He emerged from the scrum with blood on his face. At that moment, it was obvious that something serious had happened, something historic. And then Trump raised his fist and vowed to fight. That moment and that picture changed the election. Here's the state of play 2 days later. President Biden has addressed the nation, calling for national unity. Politics, he says, must never be a battlefield. Trump has arrived in Milwaukee for the Republican convention. He is rewriting his acceptance speech, focusing on unity, not on Biden. In a sign of outreach, Nikki Haley has been invited to speak. The election is now an energized, battling Trump versus a weary President Biden fighting to survive within his own party. The pundits on both sides acknowledge that the election now favors Trump. All right, look at the financial markets. We have a Monday morning rally, and it's a strong rally. Can we call this a Trump rally? We will be asking. The Dow up 200, S&P 21, NASDAQ up another 77 points. Bitcoin rallying as well. You're looking at 62,600. That's the quote now. The yield on the 10-year Treasury coming in just below 4.25%, 4.23. The 2-year right around 4.5%, 4.46. On the show today, trouble for the Secret Service, heavy criticism for allowing a shooter to get within the line of sight of a presidential candidate, and for possibly allowing DEI to influence Secret Service hiring. You will hear eyewitness accounts of the shooting, including the person next to Trump who got the first words from him right after the shooting. And we will suggest that some of the people who now want to lower the political temperature should look in the mirror because they were the ones who raised the temperature in the first place. It is Monday, July 15th, 2024.
And that was Stuart Varney with the headlines. And again, he mealy-mouths this whole situation. He says, I was there and I knew when I saw he had blood on his face that something had happened, something historic. No, he knew that there was an assassination attempt. That's what he really knew. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney with My Take.
Those people who are now calling for a lowering of the political temperature should look in the mirror. Many of them are responsible for raising the temperature in the first place. President Biden, just days before Saturday's assassination attempt, had labeled Donald Trump a dictator, an enemy of democracy, and a liar. He was trying to revitalize his own campaign after a disastrous debate and a gaffe-filled press conference. Then last night, realizing the shooting had changed the election, the president came out strong against the violence that he had encouraged. Now, he's absolutely right to call for national unity, but he should acknowledge the role that he and his party played fomenting Trump hatred. And so should the media. For the best part of a decade, there's been a constant drumbeat of contemptuous loathing. The media encouraged Biden's undemocratic, lawfare pursuit of the former president. They gloated over the mugshot. The New York Times and the Washington Post only turned on Biden when they figured he couldn't win. They don't love Biden, they just hate Trump. And now they're urging unity for the good of the country. Lower the temperature when you are responsible for the boiling point. And let's not forget the president's immediate circle. They deliberately misled us all. Biden is not sharp as a tack. He isn't raring to go, as we found out at the debate. By claiming he was in good shape and the only guy able to beat Trump, they assured us that only Joe could deliver us from the evil of Trump. Lie to stop Trump. Not good. The ball is now in Trump's court. He is rewriting his convention speech to concentrate on unity. He has survived Trump hatred and an assassin's bullet. He is the comeback guy. Biden is not. All right, now I want you to listen to a CNN host scolding Trump for his reaction immediately after being shot on Saturday. Roll that tape, please.
I do want to say there was one thing that when I watched the tape, I found odd because of all of the heated rhetoric. And that is that after he was hit, former President Trump got up and said, fight, fight, fight. I think what we're hearing from people is that's not the message that we want to be sending right now. We want to tamp it down.
That's not the message? Oh, dearie me. Joe Concha's still with us.
Anyways, that is Stuart Varney and My Take. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Patriotic Shorts.
I'm flying this beautiful Corsair I just brought in from Kissimmee this morning. Iconic World War II fighter. We call it the Beast. We have a 2,000 horsepower radial engine, 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp, over 13-foot propeller on this. Very harmonized on the controls, agile, maneuverable. It's just phenomenal. Keep in mind, this airplane is designed as a carrier plane, so at the time they could stack twice as many airplanes on an aircraft carrier. In order to do that, the wings fold up on them. The gull wing is another noticeable thing about this airplane. And if you look at this 13-foot plus propeller, if you had a wing that came straight out of this, in order to have ground clearance, your landing gear would have to be this tall. Some of the engineers came up with this idea to bring it down and be able to use a shorter gear. So it kind of made the whole thing possible. And then, of course, the big thing was with the fuselage is let's build exactly what we have to fit behind that big 18-cylinder radial engine.
You just do the best you can. The first couple of times, it was very difficult for me to tell myself to get up from where I was and proceed through incoming fire to find a wounded man and to deal with him while the bullets are going back and forth over my head.
Kurt Tank's design of the Focke-Wulf 190, very different from Willie Messerschmitt's 109. A 109 sleek, aerodynamic. A Focke-Wulf is hunched like a pit bull. Very strong in design, tapered wing edges. It could roll very fast. It could take a lot of punishment. And the performance was electrifying. In 1941, the contemporary Spitfire was a Mark V. The Spitfire Mark V was in trouble against the Focke-Wulf 190. A Focke-Wulf could outclimb it, outroll it, initially outdive it, but it couldn't outturn it. A Mark V Spitfire could just outturn the Focke-Wulf and from a very, very high altitude, eventually outdive it.
They presented me with a letter from the President of the United States, and I said, wow, I just knew President Eisenhower was president, but when I opened the letter and read that he was going to present the Medal of Honor, I couldn't believe it, because that's such a high honor for a commanding general such as Eisenhower, now president, to present that Medal of Honor, because he was such a respected general. During my term in Italy, you heard so much about him that he had the respect of every general in the United Nations and all. It was such an honor to be able to receive it from him.
Unfortunately, that day, Bob was shot down. We converted into the rear quarter of the remaining airplanes. I got one of them. Bob was going after the remaining MiG when a flight of MiG-19s high and behind appeared out of nowhere. And I saw them, and I began to call for Bob to brake, Brake means a hard turn. And he didn't hear us, didn't pay any attention to us, whatever it was. And they came up behind him and shot him down with 20-millimeter fire. You could see the bullets hitting the airplane. Airplane rolled upside down. We're screaming, bail out, bail out, bail out. And Bob told Roger Locker to get out, and you can bail out if you want to. I'm not going to bail out. And he went in with the airplane. The reason was he had this special knowledge, and he felt that if they captured him, he would be very badly tortured.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
I want to bring us back to that. I want to eliminate the NIGGA mindset and bring the king mindset, because that's what we were born of. Royalty. You see, kings and queens' life is like one man standing on one single street. And the Creator says, stay in your lane. If you stay in this lane, you will continue to ride, but if you pay attention to all the other cars, you will crash. What do I mean? I mean, don't pay attention to the next man. Pay attention to the best man. See, the best man is whoever you believe he is, because the mind has power. Your mouth and your words have power. I became a speaker by walking into a school after having suicidal thoughts, ready to blow my brains out. I wanted to give some children something that they can take forever, something that can last forever, something that can push them to the next level, and then I wanted to die. But God did a funny thing when I walked out that school in Reading, Pennsylvania. 5 minutes walking down that street, I get a phone call and they say, Mr. Hollis, how much do you charge to speak? And that was the day my career started. Since then, I have done nothing but speak. Since then, I've paid every bill with nothing but what I make from what I speak. Since then, I've had a meal every single night. Since then, I've met beautiful, kind people that helped me go to the next level. Since then, you get my point. God is amazing. See, I thought it was about time that somebody came to the world and they gave people true words. You know, not just talk to the people with the big wallets and the big purses. I'm talking about the people that have nothing. I'm talking about the people who can barely get cough syrup and barely feed their babies. I'm talking about the mothers left alone. I'm talking about the fathers that's lost that never had a father and had a baby and still don't know how to be a father, and they call the deadbeat every single day. See, the thing about this world, they believe that you can just vanish somebody into something, but I want you to know something. When God put his hands on it, you cannot vanish anything. Because that's the same man that turned dirt into man. See, we tend to forget these things. We tend to forget how extraordinary our Father is. See, you got powers and we like him. You got to awaken that power. You got to bring it to life, and you got to show the world that this is real. People always ask me the question. They say, Will, when have you found what you love to do? I say, you found what you love to do when it becomes easy to you and amazing to the world. See, I hope you're listening to me today because I'm giving you my heart. I'm giving you my soul. I'm giving you what they call real motivation. See, no, I will never come to you kings and queens with that lions, tigers, and bears because I'm not a lion, tiger, or bear. I was born in the jungle, though. But we made it out. Because you know what they say about real lions? We take over the pack. And we lead it. See, that's the thing. We got a lot of lions out there in those neighborhoods, drug dealers, killers, whatever you want to call yourself. And I want you to know, King, you special. You misguided, but you special. I know you grew up without a father and your mother left you and nobody ever loved you and nobody ever told you you can be anything and you believed it. But I want to tell you this, that you are phenomenal. You are a king. You come from royal blood. You stand on the tip top of the pyramids. You are royalty, king. You are a light. You are a star. The question is, do you believe you are?
And that was a little bit of motivation from Mr. Will Hollis. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic.
Never do anything out of habit. So in the majority of other things, we address circumstances not in accordance with the right assumptions, but mostly by following wretched habit. Since all that I've said is the case, the person in training must seek to rise above so as to stop seeking out pleasure and steering away from pain, to stop clinging to living and abhorring death, and in the case of property and money, to stop valuing receiving over giving. Musonius Rufus, Lectures, 6.25.5 through 11. A worker is asked, "Why did you do it this way?" The answer, "Because that's the way we've always done things." The answer frustrates every good boss and sets the mouth of every entrepreneur watering. The worker has stopped thinking and is mindlessly operating out of habit. The business is ripe for disruption by a competitor, and the worker will probably get fired by any thinking boss. We should apply the same ruthlessness to our own habits. In fact, we are studying philosophy precisely to break ourselves of rote behavior. Find what you do out of rote memory or routine. Ask yourself, is this really the best way to do it? Know why you do what you do. Do it for the right reasons.
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Okay, politics and religion, stay away from those if you want to stay away from a fight. The woke culture has certainly exacerbated the situation because everybody is on eggshells. You know, it's like walking through an ideological minefield every time we open our mouths that we're going to be offending somebody. And then religion, are you kidding? Is one of the most volatile topics to bring up. So I do get that, you know, we're just afraid to say even that we're Christians. Well, the trouble is you just can't accept that scenario as a Christian because it's essential to our lives that we evangelize. You know, as Paul says, I mean, woe to me if I do not evangelize. Well, that's true of every baptized person. We're all prophets. We're commissioned to announce the gospel. A lot.
Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The perception of reality, the learning of facts, the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood are exclusively individual capacities. The mind is an exclusively individual affair. There's no such thing as a collective brain. And intellectual integrity, the refusal to sacrifice one's mind and one's knowledge of the truth to any social pressures, is a profoundly and properly selfish attitude." Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day from the Comprachicos, Return of the Primitive. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
Interpretation. In interviews, Hitchcock often told a story about his childhood. When he was around 6, his father, upset at something he had done, sent him to the local police station with a note. The officer on duty read the note and locked little Alfred in a cell, telling him, "This is what we do to naughty boys." He was released after just a few minutes, but the experience marked him indelibly. Had his father yelled at him, as most boys' fathers did, he would have become defensive and rebellious. But leaving him alone, surrounded by frightening authority figures in a dark cell with its unfamiliar smells, that was a much more powerful way to communicate. As Hitchcock discovered, to teach people a lesson, to really alter their behavior, you must alter their experience, aim at their emotions, inject unforgettable images into their minds, shake them up. Unless you are supremely eloquent, it is hard to accomplish this through words and direct expression. There are simply too many people talking at us, trying to persuade us of this or that. Words become part of this noise, and we either tune them out or become even more resistant. To communicate in a deep and real way, you must bring people back to their childhood, when they were less defensive and more impressed by sounds, images, actions, a world of pre-verbal communication. It requires speaking a kind of language composed of actions, all strategically designed to affect people's moods and emotions, what they can least control. That is precisely the language Hitchcock developed and perfected over the years. With actors, he wanted to get the most natural performance out of them. In essence, to get them not to act. To tell them to relax or be natural would have been absurd. It would only have made them more awkward and defensive than they already were. Instead, just as his father had gotten him to feel terror in a London police station, he got them to feel the emotions of the movie. Frustration, isolation, loss of inhibition. Of course, he hadn't mislaid the handcuffs key somewhere on the set of the 39 Steps, as Donat later found out. The supposed loss was a strategy. Instead of prodding actors with irritating words, which come from the outside and are pushed away, Hitchcock made these feelings part of their inner experience. And this communicated immediately on screen. With audiences, too, Hitchcock never preached a message. Instead, he used the visual power of film to return them to that childlike state when images and compelling symbols had such a visceral effect. It is imperative in life's battles to be able to communicate your ideas to people, to be able to alter their behavior. Communication is a form of warfare. Your enemies here are defensive. They want to be left alone with their pre-existing prejudices and beliefs. The more deeply you penetrate their defenses, the more you occupy their mental space, the more effectively you are communicating. In verbal terms, most people wage a kind of medieval warfare, using words, pleas, and calls for attention like battle axes and clubs to hit people over the head. But in being so direct, they only make their targets more resistant. Instead, you must learn to fight indirectly and unconventionally, tricking people into lowering their defenses, hitting their emotions, altering their experience, dazzling them with images, powerful symbols, and visceral sensory cues. Bringing them back to that childlike state when they were more vulnerable and fluid, the communicated idea penetrates deep behind their defenses. Because you are not fighting the usual way, you will have an unusual power.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote for somebody else other than Joe Biden because he simply hasn't done anything for you. I'm not talking about how he's not conservative enough or he hasn't balanced the budget or things like that, because I know you guys don't particularly care about all that. I'm talking about the things you care about. Number one thing he was going to do that you care about is stack the court. He was going to expand it by 4 seats, by going ahead and getting D.C. to be a state, Puerto Rico to be a state, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever happened to that? He started a committee or commission to study the problem, and that's where all good ideas go to die. And so that's nothing. So now what about single payer? Where are we on single payer? Because isn't it Obamacare supposed to be a step in the direction of single payer? So how come that hasn't happened? He hasn't done anything. What about war? Democrats are supposed to be the party of peace. But he has allowed 2 wars to break out and continue under his administration. So, and then again, what about things like inflation? Going to the grocery store and having to pay more. And nobody can deny that there's inflation because we all go to the grocery store and we all know that the prices have gone up. And that's no good for anybody. So just for those 3 things, why bother to vote for Joe Biden? He hasn't done for you what he promised to do. So you got to vote for somebody else. If you can't bring yourself to vote Republican, then vote Robert Kennedy. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, here on Barney and Company, here's Tammy Bruce with something really good.
Not a cabinet meetings since October. Who's been able to tell us that? Where's the cabinet been? Yeah. Everyone has been complicit in this cover-up. And now they want him out. I would be furious. The Bidens are furious. They should be furious. They should not move because this was the agreement. They agreed to do this, to be the ones in front. And now, because their grand plan to kneecap Donald Trump failed, remember what yesterday was? Donald Trump was going to be sent to jail yesterday. It reminds you that we make plans and God laughs, especially at the Democrats. So you've got, this was their plan. That's why they're unprepared for this. It didn't matter that they were setting the country on fire. It didn't matter that the left was getting their wish list because Americans were going to have no choice on July 12th.
So what the important part of all this is the word should. That they should be upset. They shouldn't move. This is what you want to get to skip the predictions. People are going to ask you to make predictions because the left wants to get rid of value statements. When you say should or hope, I hope this happens, I hope that happens, you're making a value statement. Left wants to get rid of value statements. Without value, then socialism. So always make value statements. Whenever somebody asks you to make a prediction, you tell them wrong question. Right question is what should happen. And this is what should happen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So here's, again, a little example of how to speak, or not an example, it's going to be an example how not to speak as a true conservative.
Last night was shocking for this community and for this Commonwealth, and I know for this country. Political disagreements can never, ever be addressed through violence. Disagreements are okay, but we need to use a peaceful political process to settle those differences. This is a moment where all leaders have a responsibility to speak and act with moral clarity, where all leaders need to take down the temperature and rise above the hateful rhetoric that exists and search for a better, brighter future for this nation. That's the work that I try to do every day here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that's the work that falls to each and every American right now.
So that was the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Two problems with this. Number one, he says violence. That's the language of the left, because they don't want to talk about crime, because crime involves criminals. And criminals are people that need to go to jail or go to prison. In this particular case, the assassin or murderer, he murdered one person and almost murdered at least two others. He was a criminal. He's dead. And as far as I'm concerned, that's justice. So it's crime. That's what the true conservative doesn't allow himself to be confused by the left with words like violence. Second problem with what Mr. Shapiro is talking about is he is acting as if this has happened because of circumstances beyond the shooter's or the criminal's control, and that circumstances acted on this criminal and forced him to go get a gun and shoot. No. Events don't control people. People control events. So again, two things here. Number one, not violence, but crime. Number two, events don't control people. People control events. Back in a minute. Thank you. So the talk about unity, supposedly the reality shapers in the news media that have reported the reality shapers are reporting that former President Trump is going to go ahead and change his speech to promote unity. It isn't the politicians that need to promote unity. All of this is being laid at the foot of politicians, Joe Biden, President Trump, et cetera, et cetera. And it isn't. This is all on the heads of the news media. And I'm talking about the attempted assassination of former President Trump. This is the fault because they keep talking about, the rhetoric and the division. It's division that is created by the very people that are supposed to be giving us news. All this division comes not from President Trump, President Biden, other politicians, or the RNC versus the DNC, that kind of thing. It's coming from CNN, MSNBC, and to a degree from Fox News as well. So those are the people that should be calling for unity. Those are the people that should be at the RNC is the CEOs of Fox News, of CNN, and Comcast. Comcast owns MSNBC, and those people are the ones that should be calling for unity and making it clear that no more of this where they're going to make profits off of the misery of other people is going to occur, and that anybody who encourages this kind of behavior, encourages assassination, encourages any type of rancor will be fired. And that should prove to be effective. But if they just leave it to the politicians, then nothing is going to change. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Talk Radio's America, and the chapter is Talk Radio Moves to Television and Tries to Impeach a President.
11. Talk radio takes over television and tries to impeach a president. In October 1996, the programming model that was fueling the rise of talk radio arrived on Americans' television screens. Fox News gave talk fans the chance to watch the visual equivalent of their favorite radio programs. Over time, Fox joined talk radio as a key building block in the foundation of the conservative echo chamber. Fox came of age during a moment of superheated partisanship. Clinton's second term was even more polarizing than his first, as the various scandals and investigations surrounding him came to a head in the form of impeachment. Each of Clinton's woes was a source of glee on talk radio. Hosts and listeners pushed hard for impeachment and carried some reluctant Republicans with them. As Clinton weathered the onslaught, the White House fought back against talk radio's hardening conservatism, criticizing hosts and distancing itself from the medium. But while the decision to withdraw was understandable, it also invited an unintended consequence. Absent the administration's input, talk radio became that much more saturated by conservative voices. Fox News turned the partisan flame up even higher. The brainchild of media mogul Rupert Murdoch and veteran Republican political consultant and television executive Roger Ailes, Fox did not explicitly brand itself as a conservative outlet, but Ailes and Murdoch targeted the same audience that, alienated by mainstream news coverage, was flocking to talk radio. As political consultant Ed Rollins explained, Ailes knew there were a couple of million conservatives who were a potential audience, and he built Fox to reach them. Brit Hume, who left ABC to become a Fox anchor and the network's DC managing editor, told a reporter, "We believe we are eligible to pick up the audience of the disaffected, those who are looking for news but whose sensibilities are continually assaulted when they watch other news outlets." Fox News leaders knew the best way to reach their intended audience: Limbaugh. The network paid for him personally to read advertisements touting Fox's fairness. Unlike other news networks, Limbaugh told his listeners, Fox would provide more than just the liberal slant or the reporter's own bias. It would be television news for the independent thinker. Fox viewers were thrilled to finally have a fair and balanced alternative to the other news networks. After hearing Limbaugh hammer away at media bias for almost 10 years, listeners could at last exhale. Remember, he advised, Fox News is fair news. Whether Ailes and Murdoch consciously based the network's content on talk radio is hard to say, but there is no doubt that they knew the medium well. Ailes was the perfect bridge from talk radio to TV, having produced Limbaugh's television show from 1992 to 1996. He and the host were friends. Advisors also explicitly recommended to Murdoch that Fox News be news talk radio with video. Regardless of intent, talk radio was the blueprint for Fox's product, with AM dial style and content translated for the less intimate medium of television. In many time slots, Fox mirrored talk radio by rejecting dry, dispassionate, fact-based reporting in favor of entertaining commentary that left no doubt of the host's sympathies, which his or her audience was expected to share. Although discussion covered many apolitical topics, the conversation was steered by a conservative cultural worldview. Talk radio and Fox had the same chip on their shoulders when it came to the mainstream media. Both covered issues important to conservatives that other media outlets ignored. And both maligned, challenged, and discredited the liberal establishment, including journalists. Fox thereby placed itself alongside talk radio as a standard-bearer in the right-wing crusade against perceptions of media bias, a campaign that dated back at least to the 1940s. From day one, Fox elevated conservative opinion and delivered hard news in a manner designed to respect and promote the values of conservative viewers. Fox's first debate show, Hannity and Combs, featured the conservative fighter matched up with mild-mannered New York talker Alan Combs, ensuring that the good guys would always pummel the opposition. This was part and parcel of the talk radio style as well. Liberals might be included on panels, after all, argument made for good broadcasts, but conservative debaters benefited from built-in advantages. While Fox's bent was frequently obvious, it also used subtler techniques to correct the cultural bias that conservatives saw as endemic in mainstream reporting. John Moody, Fox's vice president of news, pointed to the network's coverage of executions. Its stories began with a declarative sentence of what the person was convicted of. By contrast, other outlets would use lines like, "thousands wailing outside," and then a sudden hush. It was the mainstream media that was guilty of editorializing in Moody's eyes, and in those of Fox's target audience. Before Fox launched, Moody held seminars for new hires in which he passed around packets of New York Times articles marked up to highlight liberal bias. Although Fox's reporting was intended to feel unbiased, at least to conservatives, its opinion programming fully adopted talk radio style, infotainment, a fusion of news and entertainment. In contrast to news, this sort of material did not need or even attempt to be factually accurate. Nor did it necessarily focus on the most politically significant stories. What mattered was selecting stories that lent themselves to entertaining presentation, while fitting into a conservative narrative or spotlighting issues important to conservatives. When talk hosts got called out for sharing something factually wrong or dramatically overstating the importance of a story, they quickly reminded listeners that they were entertainers or talk show hosts, not journalists. A case in point. Recently, Hannity batted down criticism of his kid gloves interviews with President Trump by explaining that he is not a journalist. The open embrace of infotainment on the opinion side of Fox has produced tension within the network's reporters. At times, they have professed themselves uncomfortable with opinion hosts' inaccuracies and conspiracy theories, and worried about the resulting damage to the network's reputation. Infotainment on Fox reinforced changes to journalistic practices that were underway thanks to talk radio. Talk radio had already begun reshaping the media's gatekeeping role by exposing the sorts of red meat stories for which listeners hungered, and that inspired their activism. When talk hosts stirred up a hornet's nest around an issue, news organizations felt compelled to cover the story, even if journalists wouldn't otherwise have considered it newsworthy. The alternative was to be ignored, left out of the water cooler chatter. Talk radio buzz might itself be a story. It also got people in Washington talking, which meant journalists had even more reason to cover the underlying story. As Fox grew in popularity, it amplified this effect, earning the network influence over coverage priorities across the media landscape. A month after Fox launched, Americans re-elected Clinton. The White House's waning enthusiasm for talk radio had carried over to the re-election campaign, which paid the medium far less attention than its 1992 predecessor had. In an interview, campaign press secretary Joe Lockhart admitted he did not remember spending much time strategizing for talk radio. The campaign did view talk radio as an important venue for reaching the election's key group of persuadable voters, low to middle class white married people. So Lockhart did radio interviews and sparred on conservative shows. But he felt the campaign gained little from these appearances. At most, he was hoping to connect with 10% of the talk radio audience, and then purely on defense. When Clinton was on offense, he turned to other forums. This attitude persisted into the second term, and the White House continued downgrading its radio effort. Whereas early in the first term, Richard Strauss and his team brought hosts to the White House for the unveiling of the president's signature domestic policy proposal, in the second term, radio outreach focused on smaller matters, such as procuring local interviews with Teacher of the Year award winners. New initiatives included a radio actuality line to provide audio to smaller and medium-sized stations for news reports, not aggressive booking with big-time hosts. Megan Maloney, who oversaw the talk radio apparatus, confirmed that radio took a back seat, especially to television. By 1998, when Lockhart replaced McCurry as the administration's press secretary, talk radio was pretty much a dead letter in the White House. Lockhart and his colleagues believed there was no chance of a fair hearing on talk radio. Hyperbolic criticism of Clinton clearly offered the best formula for building and maintaining an audience. The White House wanted to talk about the robust economy, but on talk radio, it was all brush fires and conspiracy theories du jour. The administration's withdrawal from talk radio may have left Clinton and his team breathing easier. Officials wouldn't have to take part in explosive interviews or field so many awkward questions about the president's sex life. And to some extent, the DNC picked up the slack, deploying surrogates widely on the airwaves to beat back calls for impeachment. But even with the DNC mustering the full force of its talk radio operation, the administration's retreat ensured that talk radio's message became still more one-sided. Listeners received even less of a counterweight to talk radio's anti-Clinton perspective. This was another foundation stone for the right-wing echo chamber. Impeachment. The drama surrounding President Clinton's impeachment was high entertainment on talk radio and the emerging Fox News network. Impeachment was, of course, a major source of strain between the White House and conservative media. But not all Republicans were happy about talk radio's obsession with Clinton's scandals either. Throughout the impeachment process, talk radio demonstrated its independence, further undermining the view that the medium was a Republican puppet. Conservative hosts energetically fanned the flames of impeachment. They also hammered any Republican, moderate or conservative, who was opposed or on the fence. Representative Amo Houghton, an entrenched New York moderate, faced threats from local and national talk radio. Souder, a conservative who nonetheless worried that impeachment would set a bad precedent, experienced similar pressure. Fort Wayne host Dave Macy proclaimed Souder a traitor to the rule of law and attacked him to such a degree that Macy eventually lost advertisers and his time slot. Limbaugh implored listeners to call Connecticut Representative Chris Shays, one of 4 Republicans who ended up voting against all 4 articles of impeachment. The host also publicized a town hall Shays was holding on the issue. 1,200 people jammed the event space, and another 6,000 could not get in. Would-be attendees sat in a half-mile of traffic on the New England Thruway. Talk radio's battering did Shays lasting damage. As a Republican in a marginal district, Shays needed every supporter he could find. But he believed that some Republicans irrevocably turned against him after the pounding he took on the airwaves. He suggested that Connie Morella, another Republican who opposed impeachment, eventually lost her Maryland seat for similar reasons. During the impeachment process, talk radio pushed Republicans to do something that was very popular with the conservative base at the expense of everyone else. Americans as a whole didn't feel the same enthusiasm. A Gallup poll from mid-December 1998, the month the House impeached Clinton, found that just 36% of Americans wanted their representative to vote in favor of impeachment. An ABC News Washington Post poll came to a virtually identical conclusion. Only 38% of respondents wanted to see Clinton impeached and removed from office. Other polls showed majorities considered House Republicans excessively partisan and out of touch with the public's views on impeachment. But if the country at large opposed impeachment, grassroots pressure applied by talk radio helped force the House to its decision. Republicans paid politically for embracing the right's cause. Even before the House voted to impeach Clinton in December, Republicans suffered a midterm election setback, rare for the party that doesn't control the White House, especially in a president's second term. Democrats gained 4 seats in the House, while the partisan breakdown of the Senate remained unchanged. To hear them say it, some hosts didn't mind if their outrage took down an elected Republican or Republican candidate who had unacceptable positions on big issues. For instance, Milwaukee host Mark Belling had no qualms about endorsing liberal Democrat Tammy Baldwin over Republican Josephine Musser, because he objected to Musser's position on partial birth abortions. With Republicans like these, who needs the Democrats? Belling asked. Tammy Baldwin is an honest left-wing crackpot. Joe Musser is a duplicitous left-wing crackpot. I'll go with the honest one. At this stage, though, Belling was something of an outlier. Many hosts were still capable of pragmatically tolerating moderates, and all-out campaigns to defeat them were years away. Limbaugh had vowed after 1992 to promote hard-right opposition to the patrician moderate wing of the Republican Party. Yet he couldn't bring himself to back Pat Buchanan again in 1996. Hosts generally understood that Republican victories still gave conservatives their best chance to legislate and control Congress. And even moderate Republicans agreed with hosts on far more issues than did Democrats. For example, most moderates, including some who didn't believe Clinton should be removed from office, voted for at least some of the articles of impeachment. If Democrats had controlled the House, impeachment would not have been an option. Further, moderate Republicans might, out of party loyalty or in response to pressure from leadership, at least vote the right way on procedural matters. Overall, the second half of the 1990s was an adjustment period, as politicians on both sides of the aisle got used to conservative media as a political player. Talk radio aided Republicans as they sought to enact an ambitious agenda. But Democrats did not see the field, at least at first. For a time, they built outreach structures, similar to those Republicans implemented. And even during this period of deepening partisanship, radio talkers were anything but Republican mouthpieces. They never hesitated to bash Republicans who failed to meet their expectations. And they pushed Republicans into can't-win fights, such as the government shutdown in the winter of 1995 to 1996. The impeachment battle also was unwinnable. But amid talk radio's ongoing rightward drift, hosts and listeners were implacable. We cannot lose sight of the principal reason for that drift: money. By 1998, there were new commercial imperatives to keep in mind. As we will hear in the next chapter, a piece of 1996 legislation changed the structure of the radio business in ways that unintentionally invited more uniform and more strident conservatism.
And that was Chapter 11. Talk radio takes over television and tries to impeach a president, from Brian Rosenwald's Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States, read by Christopher Grove. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. if you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.